The flight from Lagos to Enugu took only an hour, but for Femi Adebayo, it felt like crossing into a different dimension. He had left behind the glass towers, the boardrooms, and the suffocating luxury of Victoria Island. He had left behind a wife he didn't love, a mother who controlled him, and a company that demanded his soul. In his place, he had brought only a carry-on bag and a desperation so raw it felt like a physical bruise on his chest. He rented a car at the airport, a dusty Toyota Camry that rattled when it idled, and drove to the address his private investigator had found years ago, the address he had been too cowardly to visit until now. When he pulled up to the Nandi compound, the sun was at its zenith, beating down on the red earth with a ferocity that made the air shimmer. The gate was black metal, steady and uninviting. Femi stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes instantly coated in fine red dust. He smoothed his suit jacket, a reflex of his old life, trying to summon the armor of the CEO. He knocked. Minutes passed. He knocked again, harder this time. The small pedestrian door creaked open, and Amara stood there. She wasn't wearing the emerald gown anymore. She was dressed in a simple Ankara house dress, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked softer, younger, and utterly immovable. "You followed us," she said. It wasn't a question. "I couldn't let you go," Femi said, his voice hoarse. "Not again. Amara, please, let me come in. Let me see them." Amara laughed, a sharp sound that startled a lizard scurrying along the fence. "Come in? You think because you flew here, the gates of heaven just open? This is my father's house, Femi. We don't allow strangers in." "I am not a stranger. I am their father." "You are a donor," she corrected, her eyes flashing dangerous fire. "A father is there for the fevers. A father is there for the first steps. You are just a man in a suit standing in the dirt. Go back to Lagos." She moved to close the gate, but Femi jammed his expensive shoe in the gap. "I'm not leaving, Amara. I don't care what you say. I'm not going back to that life. I'll stand here until I turn to dust if I have to." Amara looked at his shoe, then up at his sweating face. She didn't see the billionaire. She saw a man unraveling. "Then stand there," she said, "but you are blocking the driveway." She slammed the gate shut. The metallic clang echoed in the quiet neighborhood, final and absolute. Femi didn't leave. He stood there for an hour, the sun baking him inside his bespoke wool suit. He loosened his tie. He took off his jacket. Neighbors walked by, staring openly at the sweating Lagos big man loitering like a beggar at Mazinaji's gate. The humiliation was new, prickly and hot, but Femi swallowed it. He deserved this. He deserved worse. When the heat finally became dangerous, he retreated to his hotel and drove to the nearest presidential hotel, a name that promised grandeur but delivered a lobby that smelled of damp carpet and old air conditioning. The receptionist looked at his platinum credit card with suspicion before handing him a heavy brass key. His room was clean but spartan. The AC unit rattled like a lawnmower, spitting out air that was only marginally cooler than the room. Femi sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. His phone was buzzing incessantly, calls from his assistant, his mother, his wife's lawyers. He turned it off and threw it into the drawer. He was the golden prince of African oil, and he was hiding in a 2-star hotel in Enugu, waiting for a woman who hated him to open a gate. The next morning, Femi began his siege. He arrived at the Nigerian compound at 8 a.m. sharp. He had abandoned the tie but was still wearing dress trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking like he was late for a merger meeting. He parked the Camry across the street and leaned against the hood, arms crossed, waiting. Amara came out at 9 a.m. to sweep the compound, the twins trailing behind her. Femi straightened up, his heart leaping into his throat. "Kanye, Kosi." The boys looked up. Kosi, holding a plastic truck, squinted at him and then waved vigorously. "Mommy, it's the uncle from the mirror." "Ignore him," Amara said loudly, sweeping the dust with aggressive strokes. "He is lost." But he's waving, Kosi argued, waving back. Kanye, the serious one, just watched Femi with those dark, assessing eyes. Femi's eyes. He didn't wave. He studied Femi like a math problem he couldn't quite solve. Femi waved until his arm ached. He watched them play in the safety of the compound, separated by a chain-link fence that felt miles thick. He watched Amara chase Kosi, heard her laughter, and felt a pang of longing so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. This was the life he had traded for a corner office. This joy, this noise, this heat. By noon, the Enugu sun was waging war on him. Femi was drenched. His shirt clung to his back. A mosquito, bold and hungry, buzzed around his ear. He swatted at it, missing, and slapped his own face. From the porch, he heard a giggle. He looked up to see Amara watching him, a ghost of a smirk on her lips. She held a pitcher of cold water. She poured a glass for herself, drank it slowly, exaggerating the coolness, and then went back inside. Ruthless, Femi muttered, wiping sweat from his eyes. God, I love her. This routine continued for 3 days, the siege of Enugu. Femi learned that his money was useless here. He tried to bribe the neighborhood kids to deliver a note. Amara intercepted it and sent it back torn into confetti. He tried to have flowers delivered. The delivery man was turned away at the gate. He was a fish out of water, gasping for air, flopping on the red earth while the village watched with amusement. The mosquitoes feasted on him. He developed a heat rash on his neck. The hotel bed was giving him back spasms. And yet, every morning he was there. On the 4th day, Femi broke, not in resolution, but in wardrobe. He drove to the local market, navigating the chaos of wheelbarrows and shouting traders. He found a stall selling menswear and bought 3 pairs of jeans, 5 plain t-shirts, and a pair of sandals. He changed in the car. When he arrived at the compound that afternoon, he wasn't the CEO. He was just a man in a black t-shirt and jeans holding a bag of oranges he had bought from a roadside hawker because he remembered Amara loved them. He stood by the gate. Amara saw him and paused, her hand hovering over a sheet. She took in the jeans, the sandals, and the bag of oranges. She saw the mosquito bite on his arms and the sunburn on his nose. She didn't open the gate, but she walked over to the fence. "You look ridiculous," she said. "I feel ridiculous," Femi admitted, holding the bag of oranges. "I brought oranges, the sweet ones, from the woman by the junction." Amara looked at the oranges, then at him. "You're still here, Femi." Amara looked at the oranges, then at him. "You're still here." "I told you," Femi said, his voice quiet and steady. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll stand in this sun until I turn to dust if I have to." "Why?" Amara asked, searching his face. "Why are you doing this, Femi? Is it guilt? Is it a midlife crisis? Because if you're just trying to clear your conscience, go write a check to a charity. It's easier." "It's not guilt," Femi said. He stepped closer to the fence, wrapping his fingers around the wire mesh. "It's starvation, Amara. I have been starving for 4 years, eating money and pretending it was food. I saw you on that stage and I realized I was dead. I'm just trying to be alive again." Amara stared at him. The anger was still there, a fortress wall protecting her heart, but the curiosity was peeking over the top. She looked at the oranges again. "Pass them through the gap," she said finally. Femi's hands shook as he pushed the bag of oranges through the small opening in the gate. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, and the electric shock of it made them both flinch. "Go back to your hotel, Femi," Amara said, clutching the bag. "You look like you're about to faint from heat stroke." "Is that saying I can come back tomorrow?" he asked, hope flaring in his chest like a match. "It's a free country," she said, turning her back on him. "But don't wear the sandals again. You have ugly toes." She walked back to the house, but Femi saw it. The slight relaxation of her shoulders, the way she didn't slam the door this time. He stood there for another minute, grinning like a fool in the dusty street, watching the house that held his entire world. He had ugly toes, he was sunburnt, and he was sleeping on a mattress that smelled of mothballs. But as he walked back to his car, Femi Adebayo realized he was happier than he had been in 4 years. He hadn't breached the walls yet, But he had delivered oranges, and in a siege, that was a victory. The humidity broke 2 days later, shattering into a violent thunderstorm that battered the zinc roofs of Enugu. It was the kind of rain that turned the red dust into slick, treacherous mud and drowned out all conversation. Femi sat on a wooden bench on the veranda, his probationary zone, watching Kanye line up a row of plastic dinosaurs. Amara had allowed him inside the gate to escape the downpour, a concession granted only because his shivering in the rain was pathetic to watch. Inside the house, Kosi was napping, having complained of a headache and a cold earlier in the day. The rhythmic drumming of the rain was hypnotic, and for a moment, Femi felt a strange, fragile peace. Then, the scream cut through the storm like a serrated blade. "Amara? He's not waking up, oh! Amara!" It was Mrs. Naji. The terror in her voice scraped against Femi's bones. Amara was through the front door before the laptop she was holding hit the floor tiles. Femi scrambled up, knocking the bench over, and ran after her, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They burst into the living room to find Mrs. Naji kneeling beside the sofa. Kosi was there, but he wasn't sleeping. He was seizing. His small body arched rigidly, his limbs jerking in a terrifying rhythmic dance that looked like a demon was trying to shake the soul out of him. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, and foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. "He's burning! He's burning!" Mrs. Naji cried, her hands hovering helplessly over her grandson. Femi froze. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers. He had stared down hostile takeovers and political threats. But looking at his son, his flesh, his blood, convulsing on a worn rug, Femi Adebayo felt his mind go completely blank. He was a man who solved problems with black cards and phone calls, but there was no number he could call to stop this. "Turn him on his side!" Amara shouted, the panic in her eyes immediately wrestling with her medical training. She dropped to her knees, her hands steady despite the terror radiating from her. "Mama, get a wet towel. Kanye, stay back." Femi stood there, a statue in a wet t-shirt, useless. "Femi?" Amara's voice snapped like a whip. She looked up at him, her face a mask of controlled chaos. "The car. My keys are in the room. Don't look for them. Use yours. Drive." The command jump-started his brain. Drive. He could do that. He sprinted into the rain, not feeling the cold, and wrenched the door of the rental Camry open. He brought it around to the front just as Amara emerged, shielding Kosi's jacking body with her own. The drive to the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital was a blur of high beams cutting through sheets of rain. Femi drove with a reckless, terrifying precision, weaving through the flooded potholes of Enugu streets, leaning on the horn. In the back seat, Amara was a murmur of Igbo prayers and medical reassurances, wiping Kosi's forehead, checking his airway, counting the seconds of the seizure. "It's stopping," she choked out, after what felt like a lifetime. "He's going limp. It's stopping. Just drive, Femi, please." "I'm getting us there," Femi vowed, his voice sounding strange to his own ears, raw, guttural. "I promise, Amara, I'm getting us there." When they burst into the emergency room, the air smelled of iodine, rust, and damp humanity. The waiting area was crowded, illuminated by flickering fluorescent strips that buzzed angrily. "My son is febrile, post-ictal," Amara announced, cutting the line with the authority of a CEO and the desperation of a mother. She laid Kosi on a triage bed. "I need IV paracetamol and a malaria screen, now." A young doctor, overworked and exhausted, looked up from a clipboard. He saw a woman in house clothes and a soaked man in jeans. "Madam, you have to open a folder first. The queue starts there." "Do you know who I am?" Femi stepped forward, the old reflex flaring, the billionaire ready to crush an obstacle. "I will buy this hospital and fire you if you don't attend to him right now." "Amara, stop." She grabbed his arm, her grip bruising. "This isn't a board meeting. You can't bully a fever." She turned back to the doctor, her voice shifting from command to a desperate, piercing plea. "Please, doctor. He's 3 years old. He's burning up. Please." The doctor looked at Kosi's small, listless form, then at the terror in Amara's eyes. He nodded. Bring him to bed for. The next 3 hours were an agony of waiting. The doctors confirmed severe malaria, spiking a fever so high that it triggered the convulsion. They hooked him up to a drip, the clear fluid flowing into his tiny vein, carrying the medicine that would cool the fire in his blood. Femi stood in the corner of the small curtained cubicle, dripping water on the linoleum. He watched Amara stroke Kosi's sleeping face, smoothing his damp curls. She looked exhausted, her armor of emerald silk and sharp words stripped away to reveal just a mother, terrified and vigilant. Femi felt an intruder. He felt unworthy to be in the room. He had missed the first fever. He had missed the first steps. He was here now, but he was powerless. He needs to rest, Amara whispered, not looking up. The fever is breaking. I should go, Femi said, though the thought of leaving made his chest ache. Get out of your way. Amara turned then. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the wet clothes, the mud on his sandals, the raw, naked fear in his eyes. No, she said softly. Stay. If he wakes up, he might ask for the uncle from the mirror. Femi sank into the plastic chair in the corner, burying his face in his hands. Hours bled into the night. The rain stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence in the ward. Around 3 a.m., Amara stood up and signaled for Femi to follow her into the hallway. The corridor was dim, smelling of floor wax. Amara slid against the wall, down into a crouch, her arms wrapped around her knees. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her shaking. Femi sat on the floor beside her, keeping a respectful distance. I didn't know, Femi whispered. The confession hung in the quiet air. Amara glanced at him sideways. Didn't know what? That it felt like this, Femi said, his voice cracking. He stared at his hands, hands that had signed billion-naira contracts, hands that had shaken presidents. They were trembling. When he was shaking in that room, I would have traded every oil well, every share, every single naira in my accounts just to take the heat from his body into mine. I felt like I was dying in that car, Amara. I am a useless man. I have everything, and I could do nothing. Amara watched him. She saw the golden prince reduced to a man sitting on a hospital floor, shattered by the vulnerability of loving something he couldn't control. She realized then that the man who had discarded her 4 years ago was truly dead. That man was made of ice and ego. This man was flesh and blood and fear. She reached out and covered his trembling hand with hers. You drove, she said quietly. Femi shook his head. It's not enough. It's a start, Amara said. You didn't run. You didn't call an assistant. You didn't throw money at it and walk away. You stayed in the storm. You stayed in the room. She squeezed his hand. That is what a father does, Femi. He doesn't fix everything. He just stays when it's scary. Femi turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. It was the first time they had held hands in 4 years. His grip was desperate, holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. I'm not going anywhere, he promised, his voice rough with exhaustion and truth. I'll sleep on this floor. I'll stand at your gate. I'll wait 1,000 years. I'm not leaving you again. Don't promise forever yet, Amara murmured, closing her eyes, her head tilting slightly towards his shoulder. Just promise me you'll be here when he wakes up. I promise. They sat there in the dim hallway of the Nsukka General Hospital, the billionaire and the CEO, stripped of their titles, just two parents leaning on each other in the quiet hours before dawn, waiting for the fever to break. Kosi recovered with the resilience of youth, bouncing back from the malaria scare within days, his energy restored to full, chaotic capacity. For Femi, however, the recovery was slower. The terror of that night in the hospital had permanently altered his molecular structure, burning away the last vestiges of his arrogance and leaving behind a man who was desperate to be useful. He began showing up at the Energy compound not as a visitor, but as a laborer. The siege of Enugu had shifted into what the neighbors were calling the penance of the Lagos big man. Every morning, Femi's rental car would pull up. He would step out, abandoning the suit entirely for jeans and t-shirts that were slowly acquiring permanent stains of red earth and palm oil. His first enemy was the generator. It was a beast of a machine, the industrial diesel generator Amara had bought with her first major check. It powered the whole compound, but it had a temperament as fiery as Amara's. On a humid Tuesday, it sputtered and died, plunging the house into silence. "I'll call the technician," Amara said, reaching for her phone. "No," Femi said, stepping forward. He rolled up his sleeves. "I run an energy company. I can fix a generator." Amara raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "Femdi, you run board meetings about oil futures. You don't fix carburetors." "An engine is an engine," he insisted, marching toward the generator house with unearned confidence. 2 hours later, Femi emerged. He was covered in black grease. There was a smear of oil across his forehead. His knuckles were skinned, and his t-shirt was ruined. He looked like he had wrestled a bear and lost. "It's the fuel filter," he announced, trying to sound authoritative despite looking like a mechanic's apprentice. "And possibly the injector nozzle." Amara, who had been watching him struggle from the kitchen window with a mix of amusement and pity, walked over. She handed him a rag. "The technician will be here in an hour," she said, hiding a smile. Femi slumped against the wall, wiping his hands. "I built a refinery in Port Harcourt. I oversee power grids. Why can't I fix a single diesel engine?" "Because you're used to power being abstract," she said softly. "Here, power is manual. You have to get your hands dirty." She didn't mock him. For the first time, her voice lacked that sharp edge of resentment. She looked at the grease on his face, at the sweat soaking his collar, and realized that for a man who prided himself on perfection, being willing to look foolish was a massive offering. If the generator was his physical penance, the kitchen was his cultural one. Mrs. Enaji, having decided that Femi was no longer a villain but a lost sheep, took it upon herself to re-educate him. "You cannot marry an able woman if you don't know the difference between Utazi and Uziza," she declared one afternoon, dragging a reluctant Femi into the kitchen. The lesson was okba, the heavy, rich bambara nut pudding that was Enugu's signature dish. Femi stood at the counter, towering over Amara's mother, trying to wrap the liquid yellow batter into banana leaves. It was an art form, a delicate dance of folding and tying that required dexterity Femi did not possess. No, you are squeezing it too hard," Mrs. Enaji chastised, slapping his hand lightly. "Treat it like a baby, not a contract." Amara sat at the dining table with her laptop, pretending to work but actually watching Femi struggle. He was concentrating so hard, his tongue was poking out of the corner of his mouth. He was covered in yellow flour. He looked ridiculous, and God help her, he looked endearing. "It's leaking," Femi said in panic, as yellow liquid oozed onto the counter. "Fold it," Mrs. Enaji commanded. "I am folding it." "Fold it with love, Femi, not with stress." Laughter bubbled up in Amara's chest, sudden and bright. Femi looked up, hearing the sound. He froze, the leaking leaf in his hand forgotten. It was the first time she had laughed freely in his presence in 4 years. It wasn't the cynical chuckle or the dry scoff. It was her real laugh, the one that used to make him feel like he had won the lottery. He grinned, a lopsided, flour-dusted expression of triumph. "Laugh all you want, Madam CEO. When this okba is ready, you'll be begging for my recipe." "I'll have the ambulance on speed dial," she teased back, and the air between them shifted, the tension loosening just a fraction more. But the real victory wasn't with the generator or the okba. It was with the twins. Kosi had been easy. He was a golden retriever in human form, loving anyone who gave him attention. But Kayani was a cat, suspicious, observant, and discerning. He watched Femi with those dark, heavy-lidded eyes, measuring him against a standard only he understood. One evening, Femi sat on the porch steps, defeated by the heat. He was sketching in a notebook, not business plans, but drawings of the compound. Kayene walked over silently and stood next to him. "That's wrong," the boy said, pointing to the drawing. Femi looked down. "What's wrong?" "The mango tree is bigger and the fence is crooked." Femi looked at the tree, then at his drawing. "You have a good eye." "I like structures," Kayene said seriously. "Mommy says I have an engineer's brain." Femi's heart skipped a beat. He patted the concrete step beside him. "I have an engineer's brain too. Do you want to see how I draw a straight line without a ruler?" Kayene hesitated, looking back at the house where Amara was watching through the screen door. Then, slowly, he sat down. For the next hour, the billionaire CEO taught his son about perspective, about foundations, about how tall buildings stayed up in the wind. He didn't talk down to him. He spoke to him like an equal. "You left," Kayene said suddenly, without looking up. Femi's pencil stopped. The air went still. "Yes," Femi said, his voice quiet. "I did." "Why?" It was the question Amara hadn't asked, the question the world asked. Femi looked at his son, this small, serious copy of himself, and decided to tell the truth. "Because I was scared," Femi said. "I thought I had to be perfect to be a father. I thought I had to build a big castle first. I didn't know that the castle didn't matter if there was no one inside." Kayene processed this, his small brow furrowing. "Like the Lego tower, if it's too high, it falls." "Exactly." Femi swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I built it too high, Kayene, and I fell. I'm trying to build something smaller now, something stronger." Kayene looked at him, then picked up a red crayon. He drew a stick figure next to the crooked fence in Femi's drawing. "That's you," Kayene said. "You're holding the fence up." Femi had to look away toward the street to hide his moisture in his eyes. It was a small gesture, a stick figure in red wax, but it felt like a knighthood. From the window, Amara watched them. She saw Femi wipe his eyes. She saw the way he leaned in to listen to Kayene. She saw a man who was stripping himself bare, layer by layer, dismantling the ego she had hated to reveal the human she had loved. The neighborhood women noticed too. They gathered at the communal pump or the market stalls, their voices carrying in the evening air. "That Lagos man is still there," one would say, adjusting her wrapper. "I saw him sweeping the Energy compound yesterday. Sweeping, a man who wears shoes that cost more than my house." "He is suffering for love," another would sigh wistfully. Or, "He is crazy. Rich men are always a little crazy." "He is not crazy," a third woman said, chopping pumpkin leaves. "He is paying his debt. Look at how he looks at her, like she is the sun and he is just a sunflower. Masi Energy's daughter has strong juju." Amara heard the whispers. She ignored them, but she couldn't ignore the shift in her own chest. The wall she had built, brick by brick, tear by tear, was shaking. She wanted to keep hating him. It was safer. Hating him meant she couldn't be hurt when he inevitably realized that this simple life wasn't enough for him. But that night, as Femi walked to his car, exhausted, dirty, and smelling of okba, she walked him to the gate. "You ruined my mother's apron," she noted. "I'll buy her a factory of aprons," Femi offered weakly. "Just buy one," Amara said. She hesitated, her hand on the metal latch. "Femi?" He turned, hopeful. "Yes?" "You can come for dinner tomorrow," she said, looking at the ground. "But only if you wash the grease off your face. You look like a mechanic." Femi smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the Enugu night. "Yes, ma'am, I'll scrub it raw." He got into his dusty Camry and drove away, not as a billionaire returning to a penthouse, but as a man who had just been invited home. The penance was working, the siege was lifting, and for the first time, Femi Adebayo believed that redemption might actually be within reach. The dinner was going better than Femi could have prayed for. They were seated around the modest dining table in the Inaji parlor, the air thick with the smell of egusi soup and pounded yam. Femi, wearing a t-shirt that was clean but unbranded, was currently engaged in a heated debate with Mazi Inaji about the state of Nigerian super eagles, while Kosi used Femi's knee as a drum set. For a man who had dined with presidents and oil sheikhs, eating soup with his fingers in a room cooled by a standing fan felt like the height of luxury. He looked across the table at Amara. She wasn't smiling openly, but the tension in her shoulders had uncoiled. She was watching him interact with her father, a thoughtful, guarded expression in her eyes that was 1,000 times better than the hate he had arrived to. Then, the lights cut. "Ah, NEPA," Mrs. Naji sighed, reaching for a flashlight. "Femi, your generator." "It should kick in automatically," Femi said, half rising. "I fixed the—" He stopped. The hum of the generator didn't start. Instead, the compound was flooded with blinding white light from outside. It wasn't the warm yellow of a street lamp. It was the aggressive halogen glare of high-end car headlights. Not one car, 3. The sound of heavy engines idling vibrated through the floorboards. Amara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the tiles. "Who is that?" Femi moved to the window, pulling back the curtain. His blood ran cold. 3 black SUVs were parked in the driveway, blocking the gate he had carefully swept yesterday. The lead car was a Mercedes G-Wagon, pristine and menacing against the red dust of Enugu. "Stay here," Femi said, his voice dropping to the low, dangerous pitch of the CEO. "Keep the boys inside." "Femi," Amara's voice trembled. She knew that car. "Stay inside, Amara." He walked out the front door, closing it firmly behind him. The night air was cool, but the atmosphere in the compound was suffocating. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. Security detail Femi recognized from the Banana Island estate. Then, the back door of the G-Wagon opened. Madame Ronke Adebayo stepped onto the cracked concrete of the Enaji compound. She looked like a spaceship that had landed on a farm. She was dressed in a stiff gold damask buba and iro, her neck dripping with heavy coral beads, her face set in a mask of imperious disgust as she surveyed the modest bungalow, the drying laundry, the water tank. "So," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silence, "this is the squalor you have chosen over your birthright." "Go home, mother," Femi said, standing at the bottom of the porch steps, blocking her path. Ronke adjusted her glasses, looking at him with pity. "Look at you, wearing rags, playing house with the help. It is pathetic, Femi, even for you." She signaled to the lawyer standing by the car. "We are not here to chat. We are here for the children." The front door opened. Femi turned to see Amara stepping out, her parents behind her. She looked terrified, but she stood tall. "Amara," Ronke smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "You haven't aged well. Stress, I assume." "Get off my property," Amara said, her voice shaking. "It's not about property, my dear. It's about custody." Ronke motioned to the lawyer, who stepped forward with a file. "I have petitioned the court for emergency custody of the Adebayo heirs. We have evidence of unsafe living conditions," she waved a hand at the generator shed, "lack of security, and the mother's financial instability compared to the father's estate. No judge in Nigeria will let my grandchildren grow up in a village when they could be in London." "They are not your grandchildren," Amara shouted, stepping down the stairs, fueled by the primal panic of a mother. "You didn't want them. You called me a mistake." "I called you a mistake," Ronke corrected coldly. "The children are blood, and I will not have Adebayo blood raised in the debt." She snapped her fingers. "Get the boys." 2 security guards moved toward the porch. "Stop." The word wasn't shouted, but it cracked through the air like a gunshot. Femi didn't move a muscle, but the authority radiating from him froze the guards in their tracks. He turned slowly to face his mother. The man who had been fixing generators and peeling oranges was gone. In his place was the man who had ruthlessly expanded an empire. "If they take one more step," Femi said softly, "I will destroy you." Ronke laughed. "You are being dramatic, Femi. You are having a breakdown. We are helping you." "You think this is a breakdown?" Femi stepped closer to her, invading her space. "Let me tell you what a breakdown looks like. It looks like me calling the board of directors right now and initiating a vote of no confidence against you as chairwoman." Ronke's smile faltered. "You wouldn't dare. You are the CEO. You would sink your own ship." "I will sink it," Femi vowed, his eyes burning with a terrifying calm. "I will liquidate my majority shares. I will sell them to the Chinese consortium you hate. I will strip Adebayo Energy of every asset, every contract, and every dime of value until the name Adebayo is synonymous with bankruptcy. I will burn the legacy to the ground, mother. Do not test me." Ronke stared at him. She looked for the bluff. She looked for the weak boy she had bullied for 30 years. She didn't find him. She found a stranger who was ready to immolate the world. "You would destroy everything you built for her? For a nurse?" she whispered, horrified. "I destroyed my soul for you 4 years ago, Femi," roared the control, finally snapping. The confession ripped out of him, raw and bleeding. He pointed at Amara, but kept his eyes on his mother. "I looked the woman I loved in the eye and told her I hated her. I played the villain because it was the only way to get her away from your poison. I died that day, mother. I let you kill me to save her." He stepped back, his chest heaving. "But I am alive now, and if you touch my wife, if you look at my children, I will end you. Take your cars, take your lawyers, and get out." Ronke looked at her son. She looked at the fire in his eyes, a fire she had tried to snuff out since he was a child. She looked at Amara, who was staring at Femi as if she was seeing him for the first time. Ronke realized, with the bitter taste of bile in her throat, that she had lost. She could fight him in court, yes, but he would make good on his threat. He would destroy the money, and to Ronke, money was the only thing that mattered. "You are a fool," she spat, smoothing her wrapper. "You will rot in this village." "I would rather rot here than reign in hell with you," Femi said. Ronke turned on her heel. She got back into the G-Wagon. The door slammed shut. The convoy reversed, tires crunching on the gravel, and sped away into the Enugu night, taking the blinding lights and the toxicity with them. Silence rushed back into the compound, heavy and ringing. Femi stood in the driveway, trembling. The adrenaline was crashing. He felt dizzy. He felt ashamed that Amara had seen the ugliness of his origin, the cruelty that ran in his blood. He couldn't turn around. He couldn't face her. He started to walk toward his rental car, intending to drive to the hotel to give them space. "Femi." It was a whisper, carried on the wind. He stopped. He turned slowly. Amara was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her parents had retreated inside, giving them the privacy the moment demanded. Her eyes were wide, searching his face, processing the revelation that had just rewritten their entire history. "You knew," she said, her voice shaking. "About the license, about the police." "She showed me the files," Femi said, his voice broken. "I was weak, Amara. I was young and I was scared. I thought if I made you hate me, you would run fast enough that she couldn't catch you. I thought I was saving you." He looked down his dirty hands. "I'm sorry. I should have fought for us then. I was a coward." Amara walked across the red earth. She stopped inches from him. She looked at the man who had fixed her generator, who had peeled oranges, who had just threatened to burn down an empire to keep her safe. She didn't see a coward. She saw a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back for 4 years alone. "You saved us," she whispered. She reached out and took his face in her hands. The touch was electric, warm, forgiving. "You're an idiot. A noble, stupid idiot," she said, tears spilling over her lashes. "I know," Femi choked out. Amara pulled him down to her. She kissed him, not tentative or testing, but fierce and claiming. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and grief and 4 years of hunger. Femi collapsed into her, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in her neck, holding her like she was the only anchor in a storm. Above them, the moon broke through the clouds, bathing the compound in soft silver light. The siege was over. The stand had been made, and the walls of the fortress had finally, completely crumbled. The dust of the Naji compound in Enugu didn't rise in choking clouds today. It danced under the rhythmic stomping of feet, settled by the libations poured for ancestors who had finally ceased their whispering. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of roasted goat meat, spicy ugba, and the sweet fermented tang of fresh palm wine. It was a smell that promised joy, a sharp contrast to the ozone and exhaust fumes of the confrontation that had happened just weeks prior. Amara sat in her father's parlor, the noise of the celebration washing over her like a tide. She was draped in layers of heavy, burnt orange George fabric, her neck weighed down by rows of coral beads that felt cool against her skin. Her mother adjusted the gele on Amara's head for the 10th time, her hands trembling with a mix of anxiety and overwhelming pride. "Stop fidgeting," Mrs. Naji chided gently, though she was the one vibrating with nerves. "The in-laws are seated. Your father has broken the collar. It is time for you to find him." Amara took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric over her knees. She closed her eyes for a second, grounding herself. She wasn't the terrified girl who had fled Lagos on a night bus with a broken heart. She wasn't the desperate mother coding in the dark. She was a woman who had seen the depths of a man's soul, seen him stripped of his ego, seen him stand against his own blood to protect her, and decided that he was worthy. "I'm ready, Mama," Amara said. She stood up, the heavy fabric rustling like leaves. The ghost of the placeholder was dead. In her place was the anchor. She stepped out onto the veranda, and the crowd erupted. The sound was physical, a wall of noise that hit her chest. Drums, thunderous and deep, set the rhythm of her heart. A sea of faces, uncles, aunts, neighbors, the very people who had gossiped about her swollen belly years ago, now cheered for the daughter of the soil who had returned as a queen. They didn't see a scandal anymore. They saw a triumph. Amara began to dance. She moved with the slow, regal steps of an Igbo woman who knows her value, her eyes scanning the crowd of seated men. She held a gourd of palm wine in her hands, the symbol of her choice. The game was simple. Find the husband in the crowd, offer him the drink, and seal the union. She weaved through the teasing hands of other suitors, local men who jokingly begged for the cup, cousins who blocked her path with laughter. She smiled at them, but her eyes never stopped searching. And then she saw him. Femi Adebayo sat among his kinsmen on the opposite side of the canopy. He looked strikingly different from the corporate titan on the cover of Forbes. The Italian suits were gone. He was wearing an isiago, a velvet top embroidered with gold lion heads, and a red cap perched on his head. He looked out of place and perfectly at home all at once. A man who had traded a glass tower for a seat on a wooden bench in Enugu. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't looking past her to a merger or a deal. His gaze was locked on her with an intensity that made the rest of the world blur into background noise. It was the look of a man seeing his sunrise after a long, cold night. Amara danced toward him. When she finally reached him, the music seemed to dip, the drums softening to a heartbeat. Femi stood up. He didn't wait for her to kneel and offer the wine as tradition sometimes dictated. He stepped forward to meet her, breaking protocol, bridging the gap just as he had bridged the distance between Lagos and Enugu. Amara looked up at him. She saw the sunburn on his nose from his days at the gate. She saw the callus on his thumb from the generator repairs. She saw the love that survived the fire. "Femi," she whispered. "Amara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You look like a queen." "I am a queen," she teased gently. "Are you ready to be the consort?" "I am ready to be whatever you need," he vowed. She held out the cup. "Drink. If you drink, you are telling them that you are the one, that you are staying." Femi took the cup. His hand brushed hers, sending a familiar spark through her veins. He held the wine, but before he drank, he signaled for the microphone. The chatter under the canopy died down. The billionaire CEO was about to speak, but Femi didn't sound like a CEO today. 4 years ago, Femi began, his voice carrying over the compound without shaking. I told this woman that she was a placeholder. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Amara's brothers stiffened on the sidelines. I told her that my life was a serious business and she was a distraction. I was a fool building a skyscraper on sand. I didn't know that power is oil and money. I didn't know that wealth is the sound of my children laughing. I was poor and I didn't even know it. He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping to an intimate register that the microphone barely caught, a secret shared in a crowd of hundreds. Amara, you saved me. You and the boys. You saved me from a life that was suffocating me. I am not asking to own you. I am not asking to save you. You saved yourself. I am asking to stand beside you, to carry your bag, to fix your generator, to be the father Kai and Kosi deserve. He dropped to one knee in the red dust, ignoring the gasp of his Lagos friends who had flown in for the event. I don't want a placeholder, Amara. I want the whole story. Will you let me write the rest of it with you? Amara looked down at him. She thought of the nights coding with a baby on her back. She thought of the orange peels on the ground by the gate. She thought of him standing against his mother, shaking with rage and love. She smiled, and it was the full, radiant smile of a woman who had won. Drink, Femi, she said, her voice clear and bell-like, before the wine gets warm. Femi tipped the gourd back and drained it in one go, the liquid spilling slightly on his chin. He stood up, triumphant, and the crowd roared. He pulled Amara into him, disregarding the elders, disregarding the cameras, and kissed her. A deep, searing kiss that tasted of palm wine and redemption. Mommy! Daddy! Two small figures in matching miniature Isiagu tops broke through the line of dancers. Kaye and Kosi slammed into Femi's legs, laughing. Femi crouched down, scooping both of them up, one in each arm. He groaned under the weight, but laughed, a sound of pure, unburdened joy that reached his eyes. Amara leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand resting on the backs of her sons, completing the circle. You know, Femi whispered in her ear as the flutes began to play a high-life tune and money began to rain down on them from the guests. I think I'm going to like Enugu. You better, Amara laughed, wiping a smudge of red dust from his cheek. Because the generator needs fuel tomorrow, and the operations manager doesn't get a day off. Femi kissed her temple, looking out at the red earth, the green hills, and the people dancing in the dust. He had lost an empire of cold glass and gained a kingdom of warm blood. For you, Amara, he promised, pulling his family tighter, I'll power the whole world. As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Amara watched her family dance. The placeholder had become the anchor, and the billionaire had finally found a wealth that couldn't be counted in banks. They were imperfect, they were scarred, but as they moved together to the beat of the drums, they were finally beautifully whole.